Okay guys, so last week I took you over how to do the folds on the elbow there if you do have a piece of clothing that has folds on the elbow. But this week I wanted to take it a step further and I want to show you how you can do a sleeve that changes position. So I'm just going to call this tutorial this week the sleeve tutorial. And so when we're looking at how to do something like this, what I did, if you followed along last week, was I prepared my artwork by having the, on the upper arm, I have the shirt color, and on my lower arm, I have the skin color. And I use the circle technique so that I can take just the skin color of the lower arm and layer that on top of the upper arm. And so what that does is this skin color here covers up the line of that upper arm layer. So if I hide my lower arm layer, let me just select my lower arm layer. I can Shift B to go down the chain. So what am I doing? It looks like I'm selecting everything. Hold on. I think I did something funky. Okay, so Shift B to go down. I can hit D to disable. So if I look just at the upper arm layer, it has the completed line work around everything. But when I enable my lower arm, I'm taking just the skin color of the lower arm and laying that on top of the upper arm. So then on top of that, what I have now is I have an additional piece of artwork on here, which is my sleeve layer. So let's take a look at what the artwork looks like on this layer. So I just select my sleeve layer. It's because I have the peg selection mode on. It selects the peg, so I can hit Shift B to go down to the drawing. And then if I look at the drawing in the drawing view here, then we'll see how it looks. So what I did was I used the drawing layers on the sub-layers within this drawing. So I use the sub-layers so that I can isolate certain elements. So what I have here is I have a LineArt layer, and my LineArt layer contains just this kind of folding piece of that sleeve. And then I used my color art layer to put some additional color underneath everything. So I've deliberately drawn it so that it's quite wide, so that I have a little bit of leverage if I want to animate the position of this around. And I've made it long enough so that it fits the edge. But when we do this, this is using a mask to accomplish this. But when I animate the position of this down, if I wanted to be able to animate this sleeve all the way to the bottom and have it fit so that the scale works on that wrist, then I would need to make this longer. So if I do want to make an adjustment, I can take my contour editor, I can select the contour points on the end of that, and I can just move them over. I might just want to make them wider just to make sure I have enough room there. And I didn't go quite long enough to cover everything. So let's just make it even longer and wider. And then if I go back to my camera view, now I can see I have covered everything. So basically what you want to have is you want to have on your line art layer, you're going to have that fold. And on the color art layer, you're going to have everything behind it that you want to be able to show there. And then if I want to animate this, now I can animate the position. And you saw before I put a keyframe on the size of it as well, so that you can actually scale up the size, or you can skew it. So if I push it way up to where the arm is thicker, I can animate the size of that over that frame. So I'm just going to remove the keyframe that I put on here just to make it easier on me. And I've still got this animation on here that I did last week, and that's okay. I can leave that on there for testing purposes. So now let's deconstruct what I did on this. And this is something that you can only do in Animate Pro or Harmony. Because of the fact that it is a more complex rig, you really need to have the network view to be able to do this. And I, intentionally or not, have done this with a colored line as well. So I've got, instead of having a black line, I have a line that is actually colored slightly darker than the color of the inside. And that complicates things. If you have black lines only in your rig, it's super easy to do this. If you have colored lines, you have an added complexity. It is still possible to achieve the same look, but it's just a little bit of added complexity. So I'll talk about that as I go here. So the first step when you're doing this rig is you still want to have your your upper arm layer and your lower arm layer with that circle technique. But now what you're going to do is you're going to cut off the sleeve layer with your arm. So there's kind of two things that I've done here. There's the line color, and then there's the actual position of everything in here. So to get the remember that I had separated out. Let me just disable some of these things. So that's the one that's adjusting the color. So let me just get that out of the way. So you can see what happens when I don't adjust the color. Then I just get the color of the arm all the way up. And if you're working, whoops, let me just trying to get these up here so I can see them a bit better. Alright, so here we go. Okay, so if you're working with totally black lines everywhere, then the outline around your arm is going to be black, and the outline around your sleeve will also be black. So you can just leave it like this without that additional stuff. So let's go into more detail in what I have here. So I've got my lower arm sleeve, which has that separated LineArt and Colour Art. And then what I'm doing is I'm using the different modules here to be able to separate out the LineArt and the Colour Art. So if we remember what was in them, in my LineArt I've got just those folds. So I'm taking the lower arm sleeve, I'm taking the LineArt, and the LineArt is a filter that you can find in your library, your module library. I'm taking just the folds of that sleeve, and I'm plugging that on top of everything. So it's all the way on the left hand side on top of all the other arm layers. And then I'm taking the Colour Art, and remember the Colour Art was that fill layer. It's all this fill junk. I'm taking that Colour Art layer and I am applying that so that it cuts off with the skin color of the lower arm. Because I'm only going up to the lower arm, I'm not able to move this fold past the lower arm. If you wanted to be able to go all the way up to the upper arm, it is possible to do that, but instead of just using the skin color of the lower arm, you would have to use a composite module to gather together the lower arm and the upper arm with a pass-through composite so that you could filter out the skin of both of them. And you would have to color this one with a skin color. So it is possible to do that, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to show you only on the lower arm. And if you do want me to go into how to do that on both arms, I can do an additional tutorial later on. So for this one, what I'm doing is I'm taking my lower arm layer, which has the skin color on it, and then I'm using a color override, and if we look what's inside my color override, I've just got the skin color with the render selected colors only. So what that does is it allows me to isolate just the skin color. And I'll use the skin color now to go on the left side of the cutter to act as a mask. And remember, when we do this, we always invert the cutter. So we've done this same thing before. Do you guys remember what we did if you were following along with the head rig? We did this when we wanted to cut the facial features off with the edge of the face. We also did it with the eye rig tutorial way at the beginning, where we cut off the iris and pupil with the white of the eye. It's the same concept over and over again. You will notice as I go through these tutorials, as I'm trying to give you ideas of how to do things, it's all the same basic concepts, but taken to the next level. So it's the same basic concept. I'm taking the skin color of my arm, and I am plugging it into the left side of my cutter, putting the invert option on, and that's it. Now you'll notice in this one I've also added this Matte Resize module in here, and the reason I did that is because when I tested a render of this thing, and I'll just disable this module so you can see what it did without it. When I tested the render of this thing, I get a small outline around the edge, and you might run into this sometimes. And the reason that this happens is because when you render with anti-aliasing, if you have anti-aliasing on your drawing, so I'll take my lower arm and I'll show you what it looks like without anti-aliasing. By default, in your layer properties of the drawing layers, it's set to anti-aliasing quality of medium. If I set this all the way to low, I don't have that problem, but a line that is not anti-aliased looks quite jagged. And if I were to zoom out on that, it doesn't look so nice. You know, what anti-aliasing does is anti-aliasing applies a small amount of blur on that line. Do you see it here on this one? See that blur? So when you have the anti-aliasing, it looks nicer. But what happens is that because there's a blur on the edge, when it's trying to isolate that skin color, it's taking that blur into account. So what I did was I added a Matte Resize module on here. And I just set it to 0.7. I don't know why it's got a function on there now, but I just set this to 0.7. And then if I enable that, it just increases slightly the outline on there. So it helps me to be able to increase slightly the outline so that I can get rid of that very small 1 pixel problem that happens there.